Am I the a-hole for prioritizing my children over my wife? I have one son with my ex-wife and 3 kids with my current wife. My oldest is 19. The other kids are 13, 12, and 6. All boys except for the 12-year-old. My oldest went to college out in California, and over the summer break, he ended up traveling overseas for a program. When he got back to campus, there was a specific 2-week period where he was officially back at school but had no active classes, no work commitments, and nowhere he strictly needed to be. He called me up one afternoon, completely excited, and said it would be incredible if the whole family could fly out, stay with him for a bit, and spend some real quality time together before his crazy academic schedule kicked in again. I didn't hesitate for a second. I told him right then and there on the phone that we would absolutely be there and that I would start looking into flights immediately. When my wife got home later that evening, I sat her down in the kitchen while making dinner and casually mentioned that we were going to be heading out to California for a family trip to see my oldest. Instead of being happy about it, she immediately looked annoyed and called me out, stating she was furious that I had committed our entire household to a major trip without consulting her first. I tried to keep my cool and told her that as far as I was aware, our calendar was completely clear for those weeks and we didn't have any prior plans. She snapped back, saying I couldn't possibly know that for sure without asking her first, because she manages a lot of our social schedule. I pointed out the logic in that, telling her that if there were already concrete plans I didn't know about, that meant she had turned around and made a massive commitment without asking me either. That initial argument ended up fizzling out into a tense, uncomfortable quiet for the rest of the night, but the air in the house stayed extremely thick. A couple of days later, the situation completely blew up again. She came into the living room and informed me that a group of our close mutual friends had invited us to go on an adult-focused vacation trip that directly overlapped with the exact 2-week window my son had asked us to visit him. She made it very clear that she strongly preferred going on this friend trip instead. I reminded her that we already had set plans to go see my oldest, but she threw it right back in my face, stating that she had never personally agreed to those plans and therefore they didn't count as locked-in commitments. The argument immediately flared back up with way more intensity than before. We went back and forth in circles for over an hour. I was trying my best to stay grounded and explain why seeing my oldest mattered so much, while she kept insisting that my decision-making process completely bypassed her authority as my partner. Eventually, realizing we were hitting a complete brick wall, I laid down a firm line. I told her that she was an adult and could do whatever she wanted with her time, but the kids and I were unequivocally flying out to California to visit my son. I explicitly explained to her how deeply important it is for all of my children to spend time together, build memories, and maintain a close, loving relationship now that my oldest is an adult living on his own, especially since we obviously won't be seeing him anywhere near as much as we used to. She didn't like that response at all. She immediately shifted tactics and started complaining about the location itself, bringing up how much I already know she hates California. She said it was completely insensitive of me to just assume she would be okay with traveling out there, given her personal distaste for the state. I didn't want to engage in a petty debate about geography, so I simply told her that if she truly hated going to California that much and didn't want to come, she was more than welcome to stay behind or go on the friend trip, and I would gladly manage taking the 3 younger kids out there by myself. That suggestion only made her angrier. She absolutely did not want me taking all 3 kids out to California without her while she was left out or doing something else. The fight got ridiculously intense, with raised voices and genuine frustration spilling out on both sides. Desperate to find some kind of fair resolution and break the deadlock, I suggested that we take a step back and simply ask the kids what they wanted to do. I figured that since the trip was ultimately about family and bonding, their input should carry real weight. She agreed to ask them, but when we sat all 3 younger kids down in the family room, she completely rigged the conversation. She spent 10 minutes talking up her friend vacation plan like it was the most magical, fun-filled event on earth, painting a picture of luxury, endless activities, and pure excitement. Right after that, she openly badmouthed and poo-pooed the idea of going to California, describing it as boring, tedious, and a hassle. Despite her heavy-handed attempt to manipulate their decision, the kids didn't bite at all. Without a second thought, all 3 of them spoke up and said they unequivocally wanted to go see their big brother. They missed him dearly and didn't care where they went as long as they got to hang out with him. Even after hearing it straight from the kids' own mouths, my wife still stubbornly refused to accept it. She continued to fight me on taking them, insisting it was unfair to her authority and that I was undermining her. The atmosphere in our home became unbearable. We continued to bicker, argue, and exchange cold glances right up until the exact moment the kids and I packed our bags, walked out the front door, and left for the airport without her. Despite the dark cloud hanging over the departure, the actual trip turned out to be absolutely amazing. Seeing my oldest son's face light up when his younger siblings ran up to hug him made every single bit of the stress worth it. We spent 2 incredible weeks exploring, sharing meals, laughing, and strengthening a bond between all 4 of my children that I pray will last for the rest of their lives. The younger kids were over the moon to be around their older brother, and he was so grateful that we made the effort to be there for him during his brief window of downtime. However, the reality check hit the second we walked back through our front door at home. Ever since we returned from the trip, my wife has been completely icy and frosty toward me. The tension in our house is so thick you could cut it with a knife. She gives me short, one-word answers, avoids sitting in the same room as me whenever possible, and completely pulled back on any form of affection or normal marital warmth. Then, last week, she dropped a complete bombshell on me during dinner. Out of nowhere, she coldly stated that she wanted us to go to couples counseling. I was taken aback, but I didn't want to run away from our issues or make things worse, so I agreed to go. We started looking around, eventually found a licensed therapist with availability, and officially booked our first appointment for September. Since making that appointment, I've made the mistake of mentioning the upcoming counseling to a few close friends. The reaction has been overwhelmingly alarming. Everyone I talk to, whether they are currently happily married, struggling, or completely divorced, looks at me with deep concern and says that entering couples counseling under these specific circumstances is a massive, ominous red flag for the future of my marriage. They keep warning me that she isn't looking for resolution, she's looking for a professional referee to take her side and validate her anger. Now I'm sitting here, counting down the weeks until September, feeling an overwhelming pit of anxiety in my stomach. I guess I just want to know what I'm truly in for when we walk through that therapist's door. Am I really going to go in there on day 1 and immediately get roasted by a professional for prioritizing my kids, or will the therapist see that I was just trying to do right by my family? Ultimately, I love my wife with all my heart, and I love every single one of my kids endlessly. All I ever wanted was for my children to maintain a close, loving, meaningful relationship with each other as they grow up and navigate life. Is wanting that for my family really so bad? Update. Several people commented on my post asking, more like demanding, that I talk to my son about my wife and their relationship. I decided that was fair, so I spoke with him today. I asked him if he was disappointed that my wife didn't come with us on the trip to visit him. He told me he wasn't surprised and that he didn't really expect her to come. When I asked why, he explained that they simply aren't close. I asked how he felt about that, and he said he didn't really feel strongly one way or the other. He wasn't upset, but he also didn't feel like there was a deep connection between them. I asked him if he considered her a good stepmother. He said yes, but then explained that he never really viewed her as a stepmother in the traditional sense because he never lived with her. Most of their interactions happened when he was visiting me, and even then, their time together was limited. He pointed out that he and his siblings have regular calls and video chats between visits, but with my wife there has never really been that kind of relationship. Technically, she is his stepmother, but in his mind, she is just her name. He wasn't saying that negatively. He said she had always been kind to him and that she was a good person, but she wasn't someone he had built a close bond with. After that conversation, we talked about other things, but what he said stayed with me. Later that night, I brought it up with my wife. I asked her how she felt about my son. She said he was a good young man. I asked if she loved him, and she thought that was a strange question. She said that because she loves me and I love him, she loves him in that way. That answer bothered me, but I tried not to focus only on that. I asked why she didn't want to visit him. She explained that she sees him as an adult who needs to build his own life rather than continue relying on the family structure he had growing up. She said she would understand spending time together if we were already traveling somewhere, but because she dislikes California, the only reason she would be going would be specifically to see him. In her mind, that felt unnecessary. I asked her if she wanted all of the kids to remain close as they got older. She said she didn't think that was something people should force. She explained that she isn't close with her own sister. They talk occasionally, and sometimes years pass without seeing each other in person. When they do spend time together, they get along, but they don't have the kind of relationship where they need frequent contact. She also brought up that I barely knew my brother before he passed away, which is something that has always been painful for me. She mentioned that my mother and uncle were estranged, and because of that, I went about 10 years without seeing my cousin. Her point was that families naturally change as people grow older, and close relationships between siblings are not guaranteed. She doesn't see her own family relationships as a failure, so she doesn't understand why I view my children's bond as something that needs to be protected. I told her that I don't see those examples as relationships I want my children to copy. I understand that we cannot force people to be close, but I believe we can create opportunities for them to maintain their relationship. They already have a bond, and if we stop making time for each other, there is a good chance that bond will weaken. She believes siblings naturally drift apart as they become adults, and that is simply part of growing up. She feels that trying to prevent that could stop my son from fully becoming independent. I told her that we clearly have different views on this. I am not willing to distance myself from my son or treat him like he is no longer part of the family because he is an adult. She said she never suggested cutting him out and that I was taking things too far. She also reminded me that he visited for his birthday almost 6 months ago, and from her perspective, it wasn't like we hadn't seen him in years. To her, that weekend visit was enough. I explained that, to me, a short birthday visit isn't the same as actually spending meaningful time together. I want to see my son at least twice a year, and whenever possible, I want his siblings to be there too. She thought that was more frequent than necessary for an adult child but said if that is something my son and I both want, she doesn't have a problem with it. Her concern is that she doesn't want our entire life to revolve around my son, and she doesn't want the younger kids to feel like maintaining the relationship is an obligation. I agreed that nobody should be forced into a relationship, but I also don't think giving up on those connections is the right answer. Since we already have a couples counseling appointment scheduled for September, we decided to leave the bigger discussion for therapy. At least now we understand where each other is coming from, which should make it easier to talk through. I also asked her if she could stop being distant toward me while we waited for the appointment. She agreed and said that getting everything out in the open actually helped reduce some of her resentment. I do think there is room for compromise here. I still think my wife's view on sibling relationships is unusual, but she probably thinks the same thing about my perspective. Neither of us is completely right or wrong, we just have very different ideas about what family connection should look like. One thing that did surprise me was realizing how neutral my wife and my son actually are toward each other. I won't pretend that doesn't bother me a little. I imagined a closer relationship between them, but neither of them seems unhappy with the way things are, so I recognize that some of my disappointment comes from my own expectations. Update 2. A few weeks ago my wife and I had a disagreement about me taking our kids to visit my oldest son. After everything that happened, we agreed that couples counseling was the best option and decided to put the argument aside until we could discuss it with a professional. We finally had our first therapy session, and it did not go the way I expected. At the beginning, we sat down, introduced ourselves, and the therapist started asking questions about our relationship, our backgrounds, and how we got to this point. My wife became frustrated and said that wasn't what we were there to discuss. The therapist asked what she believed the main issue was, and my wife explained that she feels I prioritize my relationship with my adult son over our marriage. She said it bothers her that I don't view our relationship as the most important thing in my life. The therapist asked me directly if I consider my son a higher priority than my wife. I explained that all of my children are my highest priority. That doesn't mean I don't love or value my wife. It means that, as their parent, I have responsibilities toward them that I will always take seriously. The therapist then asked my wife whether she considers the children a higher priority than me. She said no. She explained that our marriage comes first for her and that it hurts her knowing that I don't feel the same way. The therapist asked if that difference in perspective bothered me. I told her that it wasn't something I loved hearing, but I respect that my wife sees relationships differently. I don't believe either of us can force the other person to have the exact same priorities. When the therapist tried asking more about my children and our family dynamic, my wife felt like we were moving away from the main issue. She said she didn't want the session to turn into a conversation about my son because, in her opinion, the problem was about our marriage. The therapist asked whether two people with different priorities could still have a healthy and happy relationship. My wife responded by saying that the therapist was the expert and asked her to answer. The therapist explained that it is possible if both people are willing to understand each other and work together, but it becomes impossible if one or both people are unwilling to compromise. My wife explained that she believes a relationship only works when both people see it as the most important thing in their lives. She said she puts me first and wants the same from me. She feels that if I don't place her above everything else, then she is not receiving the kind of marriage she wants. The therapist asked if I agreed with that idea. I told her I didn't completely agree with it, but I understand that those are my wife's feelings and I respect that they are important to her. The conversation moved toward the difference between intentions and actions. The therapist asked my wife whether intentions matter more or whether actions matter more. My wife said both matter. The therapist then asked a difficult question. If I continued treating my wife with love, kindness, and respect but still believed my children came first, would that be enough for her? My wife said that if I did not place her first, then I was not truly treating her the way she wanted to be treated. A lot of the session focused on respect and what each of us believes a marriage should look like. We talked about expectations, commitment, and what it means to feel valued by your partner. By the end of the appointment, we didn't really have a solution. We scheduled another session for next week and agreed to continue working through it. I love my wife very much, and that is what makes this so difficult. I never wanted her to feel like she was unimportant or that our marriage didn't matter to me. At the same time, I don't think I can honestly tell her something I don't believe just to avoid losing her. Part of me wants to say whatever she needs to hear because I am afraid of what happens if she decides she cannot stay. But I also know that pretending to agree with something I don't actually believe would only create bigger problems later. Right now, I am worried that she may decide to leave. I don't know how I would handle that, but I also know that being dishonest with her or myself is not going to save our marriage in the long run.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Daily Tales Update.